I'm talking to Elizabeth Cunningham, and she is doing a prayer for all seasons, a workshop that will occur on October 23rd, October 30th, November 6th, and November 13th from 7 to 8:30 Eastern Time. So welcome, Elizabeth. I have a
Thank
few
you, Fia.
questions for you.
Okay.
So, what inspired you to create a prayer for all seasons, and how does this program reflect your own spiritual journey?
Oh, thank you. Actually, I'm calling it Prayer for All Seasons because I don't suppose there is just one, but thank you very much for the welcome. And what actually inspired me, I've been doing some workshops called Our Lives is Prayer because the book that I wrote, which is, yeah, I can see it, is called My Life is a Prayer. And what really inspired me was someone from Rowe, I think Matthew, had spoken to my publisher and asked if there'd be anyone who would be interested in doing a workshop. And he said, oh, this is going to be like a 4-session workshop, which I have never done. But the 4 got me really interested, the idea of 4. So I thought, oh, 4 elements, 4 directions, 4 seasons, 4 stages of life. And I pondered and pondered, and I realized that I couldn't fit anything into that kind of that was too schematic. But I thought about prayer life, and it seemed like, oh, there are several formative phases. One is childhood, and one is the kind of emergencies, dark nights of the soul, internal, external forces that come into our lives that create emergency and crisis. And that's not just one phase. And then there's and out of that, sometimes you feel like you have to create your own practice. You have to ground yourself. You have to be able to have a place to stand. So that's ongoing because that also changes. And then finally, whether we're young, whether we're old, we're all facing the unknown. So the 4 for me became 4 ways that you meet prayer or need prayer or struggle with prayer or with the mystery or with what is life. So that's how it came into being. I was inspired by the 4, the idea of 4. And I think elements and seasons and directions will probably come into it, but I didn't want to force it into a framework that wasn't flexible.
And how does it reflect your own spiritual journey?
I think my spiritual journey, like everyone's, is ongoing. I grew up literally in the church. My father's an Episcopal minister. There was never a time that there wasn't that element in my life. And when I was writing this book, I had a blast writing the childhood section. Not that my childhood was without trauma. I don't think anyone's is, but I was fascinated by how children perceive. I did not actually have a very good impression of God as a child, probably because I had God all mixed up with my fathers and forefathers. And, my grandmother once told me, well, if you need to know what's right or wrong, you think of your grandfathers in heaven. And they were both bald and they were staring at me and they were nodding or shaking their heads. And I did not have a good impression of religion. That's one thing I wanted to explore. What was difficult, what was frightening, but also what was beautiful and sustaining, because there was that too. And there was the experience of, the manger service where I was part of the choir, and the beauty of the candles and the scent of the evergreen in the church, and the mystery of the kings, who were 3 parishioners that actually transformed into totally frightening, magnificent beings. So there is a lot of beauty also. That's how my journey started, right in the church and the churchyard. We also, as Episcopalians, used to say, forgive us our trespasses. And I lived right next door to an abandoned estate that had a big no trespassing sign on it. So that created lots of mystery and fear and temptation and joy and discovery. So that's how it all began. And then I think that, there was plenty of phases where I was rebelling and experimenting, but it never really went away. Prayer never really went away. And my relationship with whatever God is, which I think God is a kind of a shorthand for something that we do and don't know, both intimately. And it's ongoing. I mean, if you live a life, you're going to have crisis all along the way. I think it's probably maybe a little later in life that I decided I needed to of course I was part of various communities, the church, Quaker meeting. I created my own community. So I think there's corporate and collective ritual and practice, but my own practice has become more and more important to me, my own daily practice. And that's ongoing.
Thank you. Can you share a bit about what participants can expect from this 4-week series?
Yeah. Well, I am really looking forward to being surprised and to learning from participants. I think in all the materials that I wrote, I mentioned things like guided meditation. That may be another question. But I think I'll try to get everyone oriented to whatever our theme is, and then we will be exploring together. I think I would like people to bring writing materials, because we may do some writing and sharing of writing, but we don't have to write. Yeah, I'm going to send out a packet, sort of, which I consider a kind of priming of the pump, because I don't actually know what's going to happen, which is one of the reasons why I like to read and write fiction, is that I don't have an outline that's going to, it's more like having a map. It's like, I think I'm going there, and there's little signposts along the way. But in between those signposts and that destination, anything could happen. So I would like people to be prepared to explore, maybe to laugh, maybe to cry, and to connect however we connect. Because we're going to be working with our own personal primary material, but also with the great mystery itself, I hope. And you can't predict how that's going to come in.
No, you can't. I think you've already answered about exploring the themes as questions with childhood and crises, unless you'd like to say more about those.
Well, one thing I'd like to say I was thinking about crisis, and I was thinking about times of crisis in my life. And I think the thing that I'd like to say about crisis is that sometimes it can be an internal crisis, like a crisis of faith. And I've certainly had those as my conception of what God is and what Goddess is shifted and threw me into a kind of crisis. We'll talk more about that in the class. But then there are crises that aren't just internal, but certainly activate the internal, that come at you like something happening. And one of the crises in my life happened in certain times when I was a mother and my children were going through hard things. And so many unpredictable things happen in life. People die, things happen to you, you lose your job. Everything that you thought was sure ground under your feet shifts. So I think one of the things that I would like to look at is how the internal and the external interact in crisis. I'm interfaith minister, so I'm very open to all faiths. But when we think about crisis, we may also touch, there's 2 crises in the Bible. One is Job's, where everything is taken away from him. And people often think of Job as saying, well, blessed be the name of the Lord. But no, he pitched a fit. So I like the fierceness of that. And the other biblical crisis that's really interesting is Jesus wandering in the wilderness and being tempted by Satan. And what does that mean? So we may look at all those things. I think I'll prepare material for all of them, and then we'll see where we go. So Jesus sort of went out and sought his crisis. That Job had it just happened to him because God and Satan made a bet. But all of those things happen to us too.
Indeed. You describe prayer as a way to engage with all the seasons of our lives.
Yeah.
How do you see prayers evolving as we move through life stages and experiences?
Well, I think that when I was, starting again with childhood, I only knew the prayers that were written in the Book of Common Prayer. I suppose there was probably long periods of time when I didn't pray. I think that there were times when I had to pray, whether I liked it or not. And I think one of the best prayers is help, help. I think it's Anne Lamott who says, really, there's only 3 prayers. And one of them is thank you. And one of them is help. And one of them is wow. And I think that's a very succinct summary of the kinds of prayers that there are. Although in the Book of Common Prayer, you can read about, I don't know how many I'll refresh my memory on that, but there are many. And I think sometimes people think of prayer as what we might call petitionary prayer, where we're praying for someone or something. And I do that a lot because there's just a lot of, to me, that's a way of being aware and remembering. I think prayer is partly remembering, and that's meaningful. I mean, I'll say to people who don't even believe, I'll say, well, you're in my prayers. And they'll say, really? And what that really means is that sometimes I pray what I call bossy prayers, and I say what I think should happen. But the really powerful thing about prayer is that you're remembered. You can remember someone in your prayers. So there's a lot of that. I have to remind myself, sometimes gratitude is hard for me. Gratitude is a prayer, not that I don't have a lot to be grateful for, but struggling with feeling like, well, I don't deserve that. Why do I have that and someone else doesn't? So I struggle with that. But the wow part, I just have to step outside and walk around a little bit, and the wow part is there, and I lose myself in it. And sometimes I think really, we wonder why we're here. Sometimes I think that is why we're here, to look at something and say, wow, look at that. And to turn to each other and say, wow, look at that. So all three of those are part of my prayer practice.
How can participants use the exercises in this course, such as guided meditation and crafting prayers, to deepen their connection with the divine?
Well, guided meditation, I'm sure we'll do some of that. One of the things that I would like to tell people about guided meditation is that often people are concerned that they're making things up. So one of the things that I hope we'll get out of this workshop, whether we're in guided meditation, whether you see, whether you hear, whether you feel something somatically, is that imagination doesn't mean, oh, I just made it up, it's just me. I think imagination is how you open doors and windows and pathways. So I would like to encourage people to trust their imaginations and to trust their intuitions. Not that we don't want to check with people. I mean, I think as a Quaker, you were always sitting there listening for the divine voice. Everyone could hear it. And if you had a leading, sometimes you would check it out. You test it with other people. You test it with yourself. But I hope that this workshop will encourage people to trust their own direct knowing, and to also discover how it is that they know. Like I said, some people see and think in images. Some people think in words. They hear voices. I hear voices a lot. And some people really get knowledge through their bodies. So I hope we'll explore that. And I hope we'll explore the place of wisdom in ourselves, because that's where we meet that mystery.
As someone who has written extensively about spirituality and practiced as an interfaith minister, how has prayer played a role in your life and work?
I think all of it's prayer, really. I think that the books, this is the only nonfiction book I've written, but I think the books that I'm best known for, the Maeve Chronicles, tell the story of a very wild Celtic Mary Magdalene. For me, is called Maeve, and she is entirely fictional. As I think I mentioned, I didn't have a good impression of God when I was a kid. I had to write my own gospel. But it's not just his story, it's her story. And one thing that I find with writing and with books and with stories is that they are a way of healing. And that the deepest and oldest and best stories have to be told and retold again. So for me, I mean, I think writing is a kind of prayer, because I'm sitting there with the blank page, daring to enter that abyss and trusting that somehow I will find my way. And I think I'm also a counselor. So when I go into a session with someone, I don't know what's going to happen. And some of the people that I work with, have a religious framework, and some don't. But one thing that I've learned from, that I really learned and I've kept all my life from being in Quaker meeting, is that if we're in a place where something's sort of going round and stuck in a rut, or something's stuck, that if we sit in silence, that's all we need to do. And something bubbles up from where it bubbles up from. And then the unexpected happens. It introduces itself because you've left a space for it. So I would say that in that sense, all the work that I do with people, not based in formal prayer, but is a kind of prayer, because it's a willingness to go into the unknown with each other.
I think maybe you've already basically answered this question, but what are you most looking forward to sharing with participants in this program?
Yeah, I think I did sort of answer that question, but I think what I'm most looking forward to is what they will share with me and each other, because I can't know what that's going to be. I did a workshop once with, I think everybody there was over 80. And I didn't know what to expect. It was at the Episcopal church of my childhood, and the minister there, I guess he recruited people from the nearby retirement home. And so most of them were quite elderly. And one of the first questions I asked them is, well, what is the name that you call God? And this woman, who was probably in her late 80s or 90s, she sat there and she said, I call God, I am that I am. And I was like, okay, then let's go. So I'm really looking forward to being surprised. And I hope that I will bring that element to whatever we do. I mean, I'm going to do a lot of preparation. I'm going to look up passages and poems and things to prime the pump. And I'm going to think of guided meditations. And I'm going to also have writing prompts in case people want to create their own rituals or prayers. They can write or they can not write. But I'm looking forward to being surprised and being changed in some way by the people that I meet.
It's beautiful. In week 3, you focus on spiritual practice and vocation. How can prayer help us find and fulfill our callings?
Yeah, I think that is completely intertwined with it. And I noticed that I called that section Tending the Garden. I think that's a practice. And I came very late in life to gardening. And again, I keep emphasizing not knowing what's going to happen. You can plant a garden, you can plant seeds, but the garden is always shifting and changing. I also used to think that, summer was summer and fall was fall. But now that I grow flowers, I see there's wave after wave after wave. So I think the question was, how does that help you find your vocation? How does a prayer practice? I think part of what it is being able to return again to the ground, return again to the source, so that your own ideas of what should happen are always coming into contact with something more elemental, whether that's the actual ground of the garden or the ground of the mystery or the spirit that lives in and through all things. So definitely one of my prayers that maybe whoever it is or whatever it is gets tired of hearing is, and I've started to say, instead of saying guide me, I've started to say thank you for guiding me, if that's something that you do, because I don't really know. And I also pray that I will not miss, like if there's something for me, that if there's a message for me or there's a direction for me to take, don't let me miss it. So I feel less alone in trying. It's not just my to-do list anymore. It's like, if there's something that you want or need, let me know. And if there's something that's on offer to me, that's a gift to me, don't let me miss that either. So I think that a prayer practice can sort of keep you in practice, so that you don't miss those things. Like if I'm not in the garden every day, I'm not going to see all the little tiny miraculous changes. Or if I don't walk or ride or do whatever physical practice I have, it's like that. It's practice. It's practice. I don't think practice makes perfect. I think practice is practice. It's an ongoing revelation.
How do you guide participants to make peace with uncertainty and the unknown, as explored in week 4?
Ooh. Did I say I was going to guide them? I think that that's one of the things that made me feel like I couldn't just separate it into just because, we're all children always, and we're all facing the unknown always. 70 something now. I think I can say that. I was 70 last year, so now I'm 70 something. And in my cohort, people are facing illness, debility, death. Sometimes they have to be facing the last part of their lives. But I think any part of life, if you're having a child, you don't know what's going to happen. That's as radical a change as anything, or marrying, or separating, or changing vocation. It's more than personal, because we're in the season of not knowing what's going to happen on the earth. Are we going to turn? Are we going to shift direction? Are we going to be able to have an effect? Are we going to be able to heal instead of harm? And I don't think any of us knows what's going to happen. And that's really pretty daunting. So that calls for some kind of radical trust. I think not that, everything's going to be all right, everything's going to work out the way you want it to, because you don't know. I once had a client, she doesn't remember this dream that she told me, but I keep remembering it, that she had this dream of Jesus as someone sort of walking the earth, and there being such change happening under his feet all the time. And the message in that dream for her was, you don't know. You can't see the whole pattern. You're such a small part of it, you can't see. And so I think it's very easy for me too to say, oh no, we're really screwed. And even if the election turns out the way I personally want it to, that's just one factor. And then there's corporations, and there's wars, and there's this. And it's pretty easy for me to go into a place of no hope, or we're doomed. And I think that part of what prayer is to remember to say, I don't know. I don't know. One of my favorite parts of That Hideous Strength, I really like C.S. Lewis, and I like the Narnia books. I grew up on them. And I also, one of my reread books was That Hideous Strength, because doom was upon everyone. And there was this little group of people who were living in this place called the Manor of St. Anne's, and they had a garden, and they had a bear that lived there. And one of the very practical members of the group was saying, what are we doing? We're sitting around here growing winter vegetables. And then, but it's sort of a reminder that we don't know. We don't know what has power. We don't know what causes change. If a seed splits open, that's such a tiny thing, but it can change everything. So it's that kind of thing that we're going to look at. And I don't think it's static. It's not static, but it's something that we're all coming to terms with. Maybe not once and for all, but every moment.
Indeed. Your book, My Life as a Prayer, has resonated deeply with readers. How does this program build on the themes you explore in your writing?
Well, I think it's the same. I think it's really the same. I'll just read the opening, which is, I don't know what prayer is. I don't know what it isn't. I don't know how prayer works, or if it works. I don't know who receives prayers or who answers them, or if not who, then what. I know only one thing for sure. If a singer is one who sings and a writer is one who writes, then it follows that a prayer is one who prays, which means I am a prayer and you are a prayer. This book is divided into two parts. First part is about the communities that I was part of, starting with the church that I grew up in, and going on to the Quakers and the community that I created, an earth-centered community, and being an interfaith minister, and being a quasi-hermit and all that. But the second part is really a lot of pondering, like, what is will? What is divine will? What's our will? What does that mean? And what is the place of beauty in our lives? And how are prayers answered? And so there's a lot of questions. And in some sense, one thing I say to people is I ended that book because it was time for that book to end, but it was almost arbitrary in the sense that my questions are ongoing and new ones come. Some people didn't understand why I had the second part. It's not conventional memoir. But what I have found is that although people, especially people who have read my books, are interested in the first part and how I, came to be who I am, the second part invites them to ask their own questions and to come up with their own ideas and answers. So everything builds on this book, because this book is just a book. It's not finished. It'll never be finished. But I'm going back to writing fiction now.
What to you has been the most rewarding aspect of sharing your approach to prayer with others?
And I think that, as I mentioned before, that workshop that I went to, and there was all these older women there, the best part about sharing my work with others is hearing about their journeys and their questions and their struggles and their joys. That's the best part, because it opens up a conversation. And that's what I hope will happen in the workshop, that a lot of conversations will open up and then they'll lead where they lead. Yeah, that's the image that just came to me, that we'll be in one place together, and then people will take a trail and they'll meet other people and other people and other people, and the conversation will be ongoing. It'll just start there.
As you continue to explore and teach about prayer, what excites you most about the future of your work?
Well, as I think, this is a confession, true confession. I'm open to having more workshops like this. There's going to be another one in person in my area on October 6th. Very open to that. I can't say that I'm pursuing it, because my great love is fiction and storytelling. So I hope I will continue to write stories that heal me, and if they heal me, they probably help heal others. I have finished a novel that I'm now preparing to publish called Over the Edge of the World. And speaking of 4, there are 4 elemental grannies in it that represent earth, air, fire, and water, only they don't know who they are. They have to remember. And so there's a lot about ecological crisis in that book, but it's in the form of a fairy tale. So I'm happy with that book, and that should be out within 6 months or so. And I don't know what the next one is. And I think that's one of the things that maybe prayer teaches. I don't know if I've learned yet, but is that kind of patience and stillness. That that you do, that maybe that's one of the things that we're going to leave space for, is because if you plant something, you just have to be patient and still before you see anything. And gestation is like that too. And a lot of things are like that. And in our culture, we just like, well, where's the product? When are we going to get there? So I'm definitely in a phase that I need to respect that phase of, I don't know what's coming next yet. And even though I say, I'm never writing another nonfiction book, I think that's true, but who knows? Who knows what's coming next? I look forward to being surprised. I always look forward to being surprised.
And the final question, is there anything else you want to share about Prayer for All Seasons or your journey as a prayerful seeker? I think you've done a wonderful job.
Well, thank you. Just, I hope people will come and enjoy themselves and come away with something that they can keep, and that will, maybe a little seed that will grow into something.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Radio Rowe with our host, Fia Alexander, and our special guest, Elizabeth Cunningham. If today's conversation has inspired you to delve deeper into the art of prayer, we warmly invite you to Elizabeth's upcoming online course, Prayer for All Seasons. This insightful 4-session workshop begins on October 23rd and offers a profound exploration of prayer in all its forms. To register or learn more, please visit rowecenter.org or click the link in the description below. We look forward to sharing this journey with you. Until next time, thank you for being a part of our community.